The chandeliers sparkled like stars above the velvet-draped ballroom of the Lincoln Grand Hotel. It was the night of the Unity Leadership Gala, an invitation-only event where America's brightest young leaders gathered with seasoned political icons. For Karoline Leavitt, a 30-year-old conservative rising star, it was more than just a gala, it was recognition. Dressed in a sleek navy gown with her signature calm confidence, Karoline stepped out of the black car and into a sea of camera flashes. Her invitation, embossed with gold, bore a bold label, VIP, front row reserved. She had made it. Not because of name or legacy, but because of work, grit, and conviction. A young staffer led her through the gold-trimmed corridors to her seat. Front and center, just 3 chairs down from the podium. As she sat, Karoline looked around at the mingling dignitaries. Somewhere in the room, she spotted members of both sides of the aisle exchanging smiles. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe it in. This was a space where voices like hers finally had a seat at the table. But that moment was short-lived. The heavy doors of the Lincoln Grand Hotel swung open as Blacktown cars pulled up in rhythmic procession. The night air shimmered with the flash of camera bulbs. Red velvet ropes snaked along the entrance, flanked by suited security and eager paparazzi. Inside, chandeliers the size of small satellites cast golden halos across polished marble floors. The Unity Leadership Gala had officially begun. For Karoline Leavitt, this was not just another political event, it was the event. At 30, she had already gained national attention for her articulate speeches, bold stances, and unapologetic commitment to representing the next generation of conservative voices. She'd been called polarizing, inspiring, even dangerous, depending on who was speaking. But tonight, those labels didn't matter. She had earned an invitation to one of the most elite bipartisan gatherings in the country. As her driver opened the door, Karoline stepped out in a floor-length navy blue gown that shimmered subtly under the lights. Her hair was styled in a sleek twist, and her expression carried a mix of grace and quiet defiance. A few reporters recognized her immediately and angled their microphones toward her, calling her name. "Karoline, over here. What does it mean to you to be seated in the front row tonight? Do you expect any tension with certain attendees?" She didn't take the bait. With a practiced smile, she gave a brief wave and headed inside, clutching her embossed invitation. VIP access, row A. A tall young woman with a clipboard and headset greeted her inside the entrance hall. "Miss Leavitt, welcome. We're honored you're here. Let me escort you to your table." Karoline nodded politely, though she noted the girl didn't quite meet her eyes. They passed marble columns, tables dressed in crisp white linen, and glittering name placards. Washington's elite were already settling in: governors, senators, diplomats, and the power brokers who preferred to stay in the shadows. Everyone here mattered. Her seat was directly in front of the stage, just 3 down from the podium. The small gold tag read, K. Leavitt, NH. She exhaled quietly. For all the fire she'd taken in her career so far, this felt like a rare win. As she sat, Karoline noticed the variety of guests trickling in. Across the aisle, a well-known climate activist mingled with an oil lobbyist. At the next table, a tech billionaire whispered something to a military general. It was a room built on contradictions, yet somehow held together by the illusion of unity. She pulled her seat closer and smoothed her gown. The MC was just stepping on stage to begin the program. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a dark-suited woman with a headset and a tense expression walking directly toward her. Karoline noticed her immediately. The woman in the fitted black suit, moving briskly down the aisle with a clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. Her earpiece glinted under the soft ballroom lighting, and her eyes darted from nameplate to nameplate as she closed the distance between them. She was walking with the kind of urgency that didn't belong in a room like this, where everything was supposed to appear effortless and seamless. "Miss Leavitt," the woman whispered, leaning in close so that only Karoline could hear. "Yes," Karoline replied, her voice polite but wary. I'm terribly sorry," the woman began, already sounding rehearsed, "but we've had a slight change in the seating arrangements. I'll need to relocate your seat. It's just a last-minute adjustment." Caroline's brows pulled together, confused. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. This is my assigned seat. VIP row A, seat 3. It's on my invitation. I understand, and I don't mean to cause any inconvenience, the woman continued, lowering her voice even more. We're accommodating a special guest who wasn't on the original seating chart. It's Mrs. Obama. Her team just arrived and requested this section. There it was. For a moment, Karoline sat still, the words hanging in the air between them. The music had dimmed slightly. The MC's voice echoed softly in the background, offering warm welcomes and a few scripted jokes to loosen the crowd. No one around them had noticed yet. The eyes of the room were still forward, but the tension was coiling in Karoline's chest. You want me to give up my assigned seat because Michelle Obama wants it? She asked quietly, not accusingly, but with the kind of calm precision that made the woman flinch. It's not about preference, it's just optics. She's a former First Lady. Her team asked for discretion. We didn't want to cause a stir. Karoline held the woman's gaze. And removing me won't cause a stir? The staffer looked like she wanted to disappear. She wasn't the decision-maker. She was just the messenger. Someone had told her to make this happen fast, quietly, and without pushback. I really do apologize, the woman said again, glancing nervously behind her shoulder. We have a table in row D. Still quite close, very nice line of sight. Karoline could feel her heartbeat thudding in her ears. Every instinct screamed that this was more than a logistical shuffle. It was about control, about who belonged in the front row and who didn't. But she also knew exactly how a confrontation would be spun. She'd be labeled difficult, entitled, maybe even accused of staging a scene for attention. So she did the one thing no one expected. She stood up. With slow, deliberate grace, Karoline rose from her seat. She didn't make a sound. She didn't glance around for sympathy or anger. She simply reached down, picked up her clutch, and stepped aside. Where would you like me? She asked, her voice steady. The staffer looked stunned, relieved, even. Thank you so much. This way, please. They walked in silence past tables of curious onlookers, most too polite or too absorbed in conversation to ask why a prominent guest was being reseated. Karoline was led to a table tucked beside a service door, just beyond the second set of chandeliers. It wasn't a bad seat, but it wasn't row A. It wasn't where she was supposed to be. She sat down again, her expression serene but unreadable. No one had to see the storm inside her. The MC introduced a jazz ensemble to warm up the evening. Glasses clinked. Waitstaff weaved through the crowd with trays of sparkling water and rose. And then came the applause. Michelle Obama had entered the room. Dressed in a sweeping silver gown, elegant and poised, the former First Lady walked through the ballroom like royalty. She smiled graciously, shook a few hands, and was led to the same seat Karoline had vacated just minutes before. Karoline watched from her new position. She didn't clap. She didn't need to. Because while the rest of the room leaned into their curated civility, she noticed something the others missed. A young waiter near the kitchen door staring at the seating chart in his hand, his jaw set tight. He shook his head slightly and slipped behind the curtain. And behind Karoline, a whisper passed between two assistants holding iPads. Why would they bump her? Don't they know this is going to backfire? Karoline narrowed her eyes, heart pounding. Something was wrong. And it wasn't just a seat. Karoline sipped from her glass of water, her fingers cool around the stem, but her jaw was tight. Around her, the clinking of forks and polite laughter rolled on, as if nothing unusual had happened. As if this room full of power brokers hadn't just watched one of their invited VIPs silently ousted from the front row. And yet, not everyone had failed to notice. It started small. A junior White House correspondent, seated 2 tables away, glanced at her phone. She tapped her screen rapidly, then leaned in to whisper to her colleague. A second later, he tilted his head toward Karoline, eyebrows raised. Neither of them said a word to her, but their eyes flickered with curiosity and something else. Sympathy? Strategy? Karoline's phone buzzed silently on the table. Text from Emily R. What just happened? I thought you were front row? Another buzz. Text from Ryan, capital PR. They bumped you for Michelle? Say the word, and I'll make some calls. Karoline didn't reply.
Not yet.
She was watching the room, studying the social choreography unfolding in real time. She saw the way Senator Hartley, a moderate Democrat known for his across-the-aisle friendships, stiffened as he watched the former First Lady take her place up front. His aide leaned over to him, and their faces shifted into tight-lipped concern. 2 seats down, an influential donor, an older woman in a burgundy shawl, muttered something sharply to her tablemate, gesturing subtly toward the displaced seat. The whispers were spreading. Staffers walked faster. Phones glowed under the tables like fireflies. Even the MC, who had launched into a cheerful monologue about coming together as a nation, stumbled over his words for just a second when his gaze brushed Karoline's empty front-row chair, and then flicked down to where she now sat, tucked in the shadows. The tension in the room was no longer imagined. It was real, and it was growing. Then, from across the floor, Karoline saw him, Noah Brandt. Tall, clean-cut, mid-30s, and the newly appointed chief of protocol for the Unity Gala. He was talking to 2 members of the logistics team near the media platform. His brow was furrowed, his hand slicing through the air as he argued in hushed tones. He wasn't happy. Karoline had never spoken to him directly, but she knew of him. He was one of those rare operators who navigated Washington's tangled political ecosystem with dignity and discretion. He didn't care about labels, left, right, red, blue. He cared about respect, order, and fairness. And right now, he looked furious. He turned sharply and disappeared behind a black curtain near the catering hallway. Karoline leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. She wasn't naive. Optics mattered. Politics was theater. But something about tonight was off. The rush to reseat her hadn't been just impolite. It had been panicked, strategic, almost desperate. And now Noah Brandt was involved. Behind her, 2 junior aides from a think tank were whispering, too loudly. She had the seat for weeks. You can't just pull someone like that and think no one will say anything. Word is, it didn't come from event planners. Came from someone above. Karoline's eyes narrowed. Above. And suddenly she knew. This wasn't a one-off misstep. It was an order. Someone with influence, more influence than the gala staff, had decided she didn't belong on that row. Not tonight. Not in the same camera frame as Michelle Obama. And that someone had pulled strings to make her disappear. Politely, quietly, cleanly. But the room hadn't bought it. Whispers had turned to glances. Glances to murmurs. And now murmurs were evolving into something else. Discontent. Karoline didn't need to say a word. The Whisper Network had already begun doing the work. 5 minutes later, a waiter emerged from the back kitchen, holding a silver tray and walking unusually fast. Behind him, Noah Brandt. His jaw was set. His eyes scanned the crowd with surgical precision. Then he locked eyes with Karoline. He was heading straight for her. Noah Brandt crossed the ballroom with the force of a man walking into a storm he intended to stop. His movements were precise, controlled, but Karoline could see the fire in his eyes. The tray-carrying waiter darted away the moment they reached her table, but Noah remained standing, just behind her chair. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he scanned the table, a quiet judge from Minnesota, a journalist from The Atlantic, and 2 executives from a tech ethics board. All of them had turned to him now, mid-bite, sensing something unusual was unfolding. Noah cleared his throat. Miss Leavitt. Karoline turned her head. Mr. Brandt. His voice was low and clipped. Do you have a moment? Privately. She stood without a word and followed him toward a side alcove behind a curtain where catering staff were coming and going. The gala noise muffled instantly, replaced by the hum of industrial fridges and the clatter of serving trays. The second they were alone, Noah spun around. I need to ask you something directly. Who told you to move seats? Karoline blinked. One of your staffers. Young, headset, clipboard. Said I was being moved for Michelle Obama. Noah exhaled sharply. That order didn't come from me. It didn't come from anyone on the official seating committee. We finalized Roa last week. You were never supposed to be moved. Karoline frowned, her voice edged in disbelief. So, who did issue the order? Noah glanced around, then leaned in closer. Someone from Mrs. Obama's advance team arrived early. Apparently, they didn't like the optics of a camera angle that had you, Michelle, and Senator Westbrook all in the same row. Someone made a call to the hotel director, and the hotel staff didn't think twice. They quietly swapped your seat. Karoline's face hardened. And they thought no one would notice? Noah's jaw clenched. They didn't care if anyone noticed. They just wanted it done. He paused. But they made a critical mistake. They didn't tell me. From behind them, a loud burst of laughter came from the ballroom. False. Too bright. A speaker had taken the stage. But neither of them moved. I'm fixing it, Noah said. Right now. Karoline raised an eyebrow. You're going to put me back in the front row? No, he said. I'm going to do one better. He tapped his phone. This isn't just about a seat anymore. You've got half the donor list whispering, 3 senators asking questions, and 1 news anchor who already texted me the phrase, optical discrimination. He looked at her sharply. Someone thought removing you would avoid a scene. But the scene is already happening. Karoline folded her arms. So, what's your move? Noah's voice dropped to a level even she could barely hear. I'm firing every hotel liaison who bypassed chain of command. Every assistant who greenlit the change without review. Every staffer who thought it was acceptable to override protocol to avoid discomfort for a high-profile guest. I've got the board's backing. It's already in motion. Karoline stared at him, stunned. That's bold. He gave her a half-smile. It's just right. He stepped away, then turned back once more. Oh, and by the way, your seat?
Still has your name on it.
They just flipped the placard upside down. Thought no one would see. He held up the small gold card, K, Leavitt, and H, and placed it gently into her hands. Karoline looked down at it. The weight of the moment settled on her shoulders like armor. Noah gave a final nod. You'll be called to the stage in 10 minutes to present your award. Front and center. Be ready. Then he disappeared through the curtain. Karoline stood there for a long moment, gripping the gold name tag like a medal. Somewhere deep in the hotel's back corridors, the ripple of firings had already begun. And out in the ballroom, people were turning, looking toward the now empty seat where Michelle Obama sat alone in the row she'd claimed. But this story wasn't about who sat in the front row anymore.
It was about why.
By the time Karoline re-entered the ballroom, something had shifted. The lights hadn't dimmed. The music hadn't changed. The MC was still chattering through the introductions. But the energy, the undercurrent flowing beneath the glitz and polish, was crackling with unrest. Her return didn't go unnoticed. Eyes followed her like searchlights as she walked slowly toward the main aisle, holding her head high. She wore no smug smile, made no dramatic gestures. But the card in her hand, the unmistakable gold name placard once assigned to the front row, was now held deliberately, openly, like a silent indictment. And her destination was clear. One of the event coordinators stood nervously near the end of row A, gripping a clipboard as if it could shield her. Karoline met her eyes briefly, then looked beyond her. At the empty chair between Senator Westbrook and Governor Lynn, still conspicuously unfilled. The assistant took one look at Karoline's steady gaze and stepped aside. A murmur rolled across the floor as Karoline returned to her rightful place. She didn't glance at Michelle Obama, seated 2 chairs down.
Didn't need to.
The message had already been delivered. She sat down, crossed her legs, and rested the name card on her lap. Across the room, Noah Brandt stood quietly near a column, phone in hand. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes flicked briefly to Karoline, and he gave the smallest of nods. Then it began. The first domino fell quietly. A senior coordinator was approached by security and asked to step out into the hallway, discreetly, respectfully. But it was clear to anyone paying attention, she wasn't coming back. Then another staffer, one who had been buzzing around earlier, adjusting place cards, was called away mid-step, her earpiece blinking with an urgent message.
2 more followed.
One of the assistant hotel managers, red in the face, was pulled aside by someone from the gala's board. Whatever was whispered into his ear turned his expression ashen. 5 minutes. That's all it took. By the time the MC announced Karoline's name, "Please welcome New Hampshire's youngest rising star and the recipient of tonight's Leadership in Civic Integrity Award," the whispers had transformed into stunned silence. Karoline rose slowly and approached the stage. She wasn't shaking. In the crowd were journalists who had come expecting a quiet, polished evening of routine speeches and honorary handshakes. What they got instead was a masterclass in political poise, protocol breakdown, and institutional correction, all wrapped in 5 surreal minutes. Karoline reached the podium. For a breath, she stood silently, her eyes sweeping across the ballroom. Then, in a calm, even voice, she began. "I wasn't planning to say much tonight. I thought I'd come up here, thank my team, thank my state, and quietly return to dinner. But sometimes silence says too much." A hush fell. "Tonight, I was reminded that where you sit isn't about comfort. It's about visibility, presence, acknowledgement. And when we start hiding people, displacing them, to avoid discomfort or controversy, we risk betraying the very spirit of unity we claim to celebrate." There it was. A quiet indictment. Not angry, not accusatory, just true. Leadership isn't about avoiding tension. It's about walking into the room, claiming your seat, even if someone else tells you you don't belong there, and using that moment to make things better for the next person. The audience didn't cheer. They stood, quietly one by one, rising to their feet. The applause came later, rolling like a wave. But for now, Karoline stood at the podium, not as a footnote or a forgotten guest, but as a symbol of grace under pressure. A voice that couldn't be muted with a clipboard and a seat reassignment. And out in the lobby, a dozen newly unemployed staffers were calling cabs. The ballroom was nearly empty when Karoline finally stepped outside. The string quartet had long since packed up. Tables were being stripped of their linen and centerpieces. Only a few lingering guests remained, murmuring in corners, waiting for their rides or nursing last sips of champagne. The chill of the evening air brushed across her cheeks as she stood just outside the Grand Hotel entrance. For a moment, she let herself breathe, deep and slow. The tension that had hummed in her spine all evening now seemed to dissolve with every passing second. Footsteps approached behind her. She turned to see Noah Brandt, tie loosened, coat folded over his arm. His face, always composed in public, had softened. "Well," he said quietly, "that escalated." Karoline gave a tired smile. "That's one way to put it." Noah leaned on the railing beside her. "The board met. Formally. We issued a statement, internal for now. Apologies have gone out to your office, to the press pool, to, well, just about everyone." She glanced sideways. "And the staff?" "Gone," he said, without hesitation. "The ones who acted without authorization are being let go. We're reevaluating how celebrity teams interface with our planning committee going forward. No more backdoor deals. No more last-minute optics fixes." He paused, then added, "Michelle's team hasn't responded yet." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "Do you think they will?" He exhaled slowly. "If they're smart, they'll let it die quietly. But I doubt it will." And he was right. By morning, the story had leaked. Not just the seat swap, but the speech, the firings, the standing ovation. A phone-recorded clip of Karoline at the podium had already gone viral. Hashtags surged. Think pieces appeared by breakfast. It was no longer about one politician or one seat. It had become a wider conversation. Hashtag Claim Your Seat trended for the next 3 days. Local stations ran it as a feel-good story about standing up with grace. National outlets took deeper dives into the power dynamics at events like these. Even late-night hosts picked it up, joking about the musical chairs game that got half a gala staff fired. But beneath the headlines, something else happened. Young women, especially in political fields, began sharing stories of being pushed aside, made to feel secondary. They cited Karoline's quiet strength as a blueprint for how to respond. And Karoline? She didn't chase the attention. She returned home to New Hampshire, resumed her work, and answered questions when they came. But she never boasted. She never lashed out. When asked what she thought of the firings, she gave a single reply that went viral for a second time. "I didn't want anyone fired. I just wanted to remind people that erasing someone's seat doesn't erase their voice." That line, clear, strong, and perfectly timed, became a quote on posters, a caption under a viral photo of her holding her name card at the gala, and, eventually, the title of a profile piece in Time. As for the gala organizers, they instituted new guidelines. Every name on a seat had to be approved in writing. Protocols were rewritten. The hotel issued its own apology for bypassing chain-of-command requests. And the next year, when the same awards gala was held, Karoline was invited again. This time, there was no clipboard swap. No quiet displacement. Her name was printed, embossed, and already affixed to the center of row A when she arrived. Because some stories aren't just told, they reshape how the next one unfolds.